that you care about us, that you are here with us, even just now, through Holy Spirit. Bless us in this meeting. Please bless Dr. Hudson as he shares with what you have taught him. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, now it'll be up to me to keep you awake after that big meal. And understand that I will use a pastoral trick of walking up and down the aisles toward people I see nodding. So I've got that in my bag, and I will use it. It depends. Anyway, I thought you'd like to see my license plate. This is my license plate in case you ever see my car out there in 6 days. And so it generates a lot of questions, and that's exactly what I want. So anyway, just thought you'd like to see that. Okay, well, here we go. The flood. And again, why is it important to talk about the flood? Because, for a lot of reasons, but Mount St. Helens is going to work into this. You all remember that, maybe. Anyway, if you can convince people from science that the geologic column, the earth, the crust, gives evidence of something like that in its past, and maybe the rest of Genesis can be taken seriously. So that's why we do that. Now, the Bible says there's a lot of water from the beginning. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, I really like the Hebrew there, the first words there. It's kind of cool. It says without form and void. In Hebrew, it's tohu and bohu. Tohu and bohu. Isn't that fun? And the earth was tohu and bohu. Okay. Well, whenever you have u at the end of a word, that means no or not. So literally, that's saying no form. The earth was no form and no fill. Now, interestingly, God sets the next 3 days to form, and then the next 3 days after that to fill those forms. So it's interesting. Anyway, there's an organization to it. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, if you took today's earth and you smoothed off all of the mountains and filled in the valleys and made it as round as a marble, there would be 5,000 feet of water over the face of the earth. There's plenty of water over the face of the earth right now. Lots of water. But I want you to show historically what the cause of the flood was in terms of God's involvement. Why does God send a flood according to Genesis? And here it is. The earth also was corrupt before God, and that means decayed or come down from what it was. And the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth. Indeed, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Now, a couple of things I want you to notice in the terms. The terms there are all-inclusive. You notice it's not just people. It's all flesh, all flesh, all flesh. So, and the other thing is, the corruption that particularly gets God is violence. The world is violent, and it is all flesh. So if God wanted to destroy man because man was the problem, could he have not have thought of a way that didn't include the animals? So clearly the animals are targeted also because the animals also are a problem. I just want you to remember that, especially when we get to dinosaurs, okay? Let's keep going. Now, when you see a picture like this, and there's some guilty grandmothers here today, guilty as charged, because some of you grandmas have given your grandkids little puzzles and little pictures and little models and things of cutesy little stuff like this. Have you not? Okay. I want a word with you. Okay, if you're trying to teach your children that God provides a way of safety through the difficult times, fine, good. But if the flood really did happen, it was the worst event this universe has ever seen. And there's not a close second. It was a day that millions of people died and billions of animals died in a tragic, horrible manner. And it tore the heart of God and everybody watching in this universe. So, having said that, it wasn't a happy day sailing with the animals. Okay? Another thing that this portrays to me is fairy tale. Doesn't that say fairy tale to you? So, okay, grandmas, make note. Anyway, but seriously, when you teach the children that God will provide a way, that's fine. But also, it was a sad day for God. Okay, the search for Noah's Ark. Now, in the Adventist Church, we've been party to a few sensational stories over the years about looking for and or finding the ark. Have we not? Way back, we've had stories and speakers and stuff. Okay, I'm going to give you the scoop now about Noah's Ark. Okay, it's been found. Yeah, and hey, Bible shocker? Well, I guess. Bible shocker, it's on Mars. And frankly, hasn't a lot of the ark stuff been sensational like this, sensational kinds of stuff? Okay, sadly, I'm going to show you now the three basic areas. And incidentally, the Bible says it came down in the mountains of Ararat. So the region around Mount Ararat, somewhere. Now, this is the mountain of Ararat, and you can see there's some high-level areas where it's conceivable a boat could have landed in. But I'm going to now give you the three most talked about possible areas. And a little history first. Mount Ararat is pretty close to the Russian border in eastern Turkey. Okay, have you heard of the Cold War? Remember those days? I was in Los Angeles when I remember in public school, we'd have drills. Get under the table, the air raid siren. You know, the Russians are bombing us with an atomic bomb. It's safer under the table. Okay. So anyway, so in those days, the Turks were not motivated to have any bunch of Christian church groups traipsing around Mount Ararat in full view of Russian border guards and their scopes and their rifles. They did not want any trouble with the Russians, and so they kept people off the mountain. Okay, what happens when a government tries to keep people from doing something? What are they up to? Conspiracy theories. And those Muslims are trying to keep us Christians, away from our sacred sites or whatever, So that heightened the interest. Now things are a little cooler on the Cold War front. And now they're very happy to have Americans coming with their dollars. And they have visitor centers for Noah's Ark all over the base of Mount Ararat. Yeah, y'all come, And so there's no place in Mount Ararat you can't really look seriously now for the ark. Okay, having said that, let's take a look at the three better places that have been suggested. One is this Duru Lumpur area, which has this rock formation that some people think is a petrified remain of the ark. There's one or two dimensions that aren't far off, and it looks like the sides of a boat and so forth. And they've looked carefully, and Christian scientists who have no problem with believing in the flood have looked at this, creation scientists, and the vast majority of them come away saying this is a rock formation. Okay? And there are other rock formations in the area that are similar. So probably a rock formation. Sorry, folks. Let's go to the next one. And this is the one based on an Armenian story, because this is the Armenia area of Turkey as well. Armenians live there. There is a gorge here that supposedly a little boy was taken by his father when he was just a little boy and went up and found this great big object up there, wooden object. He climbed up a staircase and walked on the top of it. And he remembered this story years and years and years later, and it was up this gorge. They walked up and down this gorge. They looked everywhere. There's no boat up the gorge. There's nothing like it up the gorge. And then finally, there's things like this that sort of stick out of the snow and everything. People wonder, is there something there? The point is, the most conservative groups I know have come down to the conclusion of the ark is not up on Ararat. Now, does that give you a problem? Do you have to have Noah's Ark to believe in the flood? Nope, because I think the ancient people were the best recyclers the world has ever seen. Have you ever seen a Roman ruin, like a Roman ruin where it's not built over with a modern town, it's just the ruins, and you always see a certain two kinds of rock still from the buildings. They have the pillars, they have the arches. That's it. Where are all the wall pieces? Gone. recycled in some other building. So the ancient people were good recyclers. Now, when the ark came to rest in Ararat, was there any Home Depots around or any Lowe's where they could go get lumber to build with and everything? I don't think so. In my mind, I can imagine, and it would take a few years to grow lumber again for anything useful. I think they just took it apart and used it. That would make sense to me. But anyway, that's a possibility. So I don't have to find it. However, you can go to Kentucky and see the ark. Look at this thing. It opened last summer. And I have a very rare job description with a very narrow thing that said, Stan, you need to go back and look at this thing. So I got it paid, and I went because I knew people had asked me about this. It's amazing. In fact, they even used the Egyptian cubit for making it, and that makes it over 500 feet long. It's the largest wooden structure in the world, built in 1 year at the little cost of $100 million. But it's a remarkable construction. They paid incredible amount of interest in the details of it. And except when the code requires them to use metal, they use wood for everything. And just beautiful. If any of you guys like to work with wood, you would love walking around this thing. Anyway, it's got, where is it? Northern Kentucky. The nearest town of size is Cincinnati. So you fly into Cincinnati, and it's just across the river and down a little bit. But anyway, this is an amazing thing. It's got the 3 decks like the Bible describes. The bottom deck is like solid cages, wooden cages, all wood, with, stuffed animals and sounds coming like animals are in there, very Disney kind of feeling, that sort of thing made up. Storage bins and stuff like that. They have mannequins for Noah's family living in quarters and everything, all that, and that's kind of cool. But what I went there especially is I wanted to see their science exhibits, because I'm interested in that. I want to see their science exhibits. So they'd often put in the second and third levels little rooms, side rooms with science exhibits on catastrophes and geologic columns and volcanoes and flood evidence and all that kind of stuff. And they would say, this is what evolutionists believe because of da-da-da. This is what we believe because of da-da-da. And it was not radical or crazy stuff. It was well done. I took pictures of everything. So anyway, if you go, be prepared to pay a few bucks. I forget what it is. I'm going to say like $30 or something. It's not cheap. It's very well done. And what I especially like about them, me being a Christian, is they're very upfront with the gospel. And you get the full gospel presentation by the time you're done. At the very top of the third deck before you exit, they give it to you, the full thing with the cross and everything. I just loved it. So anyway, so that's cool. Put that on your to-do list. Northern Kentucky, you were going to go there, right? Okay. Okay, included in Cincinnati. You're going to Cincinnati, right? Well, anyway, now this is a few miles away from Answers in Genesis headquarters of the Creation Museum that you may have heard about. And it's a world-class museum with really good high-quality dinosaur skeletons and such. So if you ever get a chance to go, same people, Answers in Genesis. All right, so getting back to the story of the flood, have you ever heard of the Gilgamesh epic? Okay, now that's the Babylonian version of the flood story. And we have it on 21st century BC cuneiform tablets. And in that you have Utnapishtim, who is the Noah of the story, and the gods were angry with the world and man, and they just tried to wash everything away. But Utnapishtim, pretty sharp cookie, and he escapes the flood and repopulates the earth through Utnapishtim. Well, a Bible skeptic would take a look at the date on this, 21st century, and what's the earliest that that Moses could have written the story? I mean, a conservative date for Moses is what century? BC. It's 15th century. So you got 600 years later, Moses writes down the Hebrew version. And so what do cynics say? This is the original, and Moses and the Jews believe a Hebrew version of a Babylonian story. And so that's what they say. And let's face it, or they could be recording their version just at different times in different cultures. Anyway, well, let's take a look. I'm going to now show you flood stories from around the world, or at least get an idea where you can find a flood story. You start with the Hebrew biblical one, but they're not the only one in the Middle East. You got the Babylonians, Egyptians, the Persians, Assyrians, Sumerians, Zoroastrians. They all, of course, the Islamic also believed that there was a flood. Let's go to Europe. In Europe, you got the Romans, the Greeks, the Celts, Scandinavians, the Germans. They all have flood stories. These predate Christian contacts. Nigerian, Congans. Let's go to Africa. The Pygmies even, the Kenyans, Zairians, they all have flood stories. Again, pre-Christian contact. Let's go to the Asia part of the world. Mongolians, the Burmese, the Eastern Russians, the Philippines, the Siberians, the Chinese. You know about Chinese script. And some of the early Chinese script indicate some connection with the flood story. Let's go to South Pacific. Australians, the Maori, the New Guineans, the Tahitians, even the Hawaiians, Fijians, all have pre-Christian contact stories about a flood. Let's go to America, and some of the oldest ones like Mayans, the Inca, the Toltec, and later ones like Navajo and Zuni and Lakota. And I used to pastor the Spokane church, so I have to put in there Spokane Indians as well. And Spokane, not the baseball team, but anyway, the Spokane Indians also. Are you seeing a pattern? And in almost all of these, there's a couple of things that are consistent. That is, the gods are trying to destroy the world, and some clever human makes it through on a log or a raft or something and repopulates the world. Okay, so now this is a Native American Smithsonian Institution Museum in Washington, D.C. Did you know there's a Native American one? There is. And you go inside there, and it's like a teepee kind of on the inside. You go up to the top, and the very top has the oldest displays. And I went up there to look, and there was a Native American woman tour guide. She had a group with her. She was showing them around, and she was talking about the things in the case, and she paused for a moment. Of course, I'm cheap, and I'm trying to get the tour without paying for it. And she said, my people, her tribe, my people have a flood story. And she looked at the people in the tour, and she said, you people have too, right? And she said, maybe there's something to it. And I said, in the Smithsonian Institution. Only Native America could get away with that. But anyway, it's pretty cool. Okay, so let's talk about the history, how we changed from believing in the flood to not believing in the flood in terms of geology and the patterns in the Western culture, Western science. For a while, when it says all that day in the Bible, on that day all the fountains of the great deep were opened up, which could also include volcanic fountains. It says that was a standard understanding of the Earth's history for centuries in the Western world. In other words, when you see canyons and hills and everything, all of these were formed and shaped by the flood. They accepted it, not a problem. Then some things happened, and that was the rise of secular humanism and the sliding of Christianity in the Western universities, like in Oxford and Cambridge. Christianity went downhill, and one of the things I wanted to say about Charles Darwin, I actually blame much of Darwin's weak views about God and suffering on his teachers. Because at Cambridge, for one thing, for instance, in Cambridge University, there was only one professor of all of his professors that still believed Genesis was historical. So already they were moving away from a historical understanding or a literal understanding of the Bible to make it more of a mythical kind of nice bunch of well-intended stories and so forth. And so you begin to lose contact with a literal God who literally has contacted people in the past with literal encounters. And you kind of make it, you pick it kind of thing. And so already Darwin was having this weak training at Cambridge. That sounds funny. Sorry if anybody's here from Cambridge. But a weak Christianity. The decline of Christianity was felt certainly in the theology departments, as well as the science departments. Now notice, this is the father of modern geology, James Hudson. And he proposed uniformitarianism. It sounds like a church, doesn't it? I'm a uniformitarianist. What are you? So, it sounds like First Church of Uniform. Yeah, whatever. That is that things uniformly happen in the Earth's surface. In other words, the processes we see today haven't changed too much from the beginning, whenever that was. Okay, let me give you an example. So let's go to the base of the Grand Canyon, at the exit of the Grand Canyon, the Colorado River. Measure how much dirt comes out of the Colorado River in 1 year, let's say. And let's say, because yes, it's an easier number to calculate, let's say 1 cubic mile comes out in 1 year. That's a lot. Okay, 1 cubic miles comes out. All right, take a look at Grand Canyon. Let's say that there's 1 million cubic miles that are gone, and that's way too many. But anyway, okay, 1 per year. It's taken 1 million years to make the Grand Canyon. End of discussion. Simple as that. That's uniformitarianism. Do you get it? All the measurable things going on happened at the same way. And that is the way science has been going for a while. And incidentally, it was clearly opposing the biblical view. And that was part of their literature even. So, no prospect of an end. The present is the key to the past. Now, that was the standard understanding for the last couple of centuries. You could never say that. I don't know if you guys have heard my radio program with my friend at Bremerton Church. Incidentally, you just sent people off to him at the Bremerton Church. Yeah. Well, I'll try to get him to say thank you to you guys. Yeah. My friend that does a radio program with me is the pastor of the Bremerton Church. You just sent the Connors to? Anyway, okay. Why was I saying that? Sink the Beagle. Sink the Beagle. John, that's exactly right. Pastor John and I, do this radio program called Sink the Beagle, which is the HMS Beagle. People ask, Sink the Beagle, you guys against dogs or something? You know. But anyway, so in this, we make fun of the following thing. We say scientists' hardest word to pronounce for scientists to pronounce. Hardest word. Can't get it out, is flood. You know, it locks up there. And I'm going to illustrate it here now. Watch. That's been the standard understanding until this UW guy came along. In other words, uniformitarian is a way to go. Until this UW guy comes along. Now, I did this lecture in Pullman, which is Cougars. Washington State, go Cougs. Okay, and I said to them, sorry guys, this was a husky. Okay, J. Harlan Bretz, UW geologist, went to Dry Falls. You ever been to Dry Falls? You guys are approaching, not a huge drive for you, Central Washington. So go up to Dry Falls, which is right there. And this is Dry Falls. And J. Harlan Bretz from UW went over here and looked at this and says, boy, there's a little water down here. But this sure looks like the remnants of a falls, Niagara Falls. A Niagara Falls with the water turned off, except it's even bigger. It's even wider. So it looks like a falls came over this, but there's no falls now, which is going against things continue as they have uniformitarian. So he went up to Missoula, and I've done this talk in Missoula, and when I described the following, they got it. I said he went to Missoula and he looked around the hills, all around Missoula, and you could see shorelines all around Missoula, several shorelines up the sides of hills. So this is what he conjectured. He got this on a map and figured out that for a period of time during what we would call the Ice Age, and flood people believe in an Ice Age post-flood. Anyway, that an ice dam formed at the mouth of the Clark Fork River and caused a backup of water that made a lake the size of one of the Great Lakes today in America, like Lake Erie. Okay, backed up that far and then broke through the ice dam and emptied out in a matter of 1 to 2 days. Can you imagine draining a lake that size in 1 to 2 days? The power and force of the water coming out. And he mapped it. He mapped it coming right down through Spokane, right over the Dry Falls, and carved Dry Falls, and came right down the Columbia River Gorge and made it wider and bigger. Okay, and actually they've traced it, gone right underwater out the mouth of the river and found evidence that it carved even further out into the ocean. Okay, now He got all of this material, this all support for this view, presented it to the geologists of America, and what do you think they said? They said, "Are you trying to say that there was a lot of water once?" We don't believe that around here, you know. And it took him 40 years of pounding on them with more information. He got a plane and he took pictures from the sky of huge ripple marks that were along the way. Huge ripple marks, that kind of ripple that can only be made by a whole lot of water. Presented them. Finally, he talked a group of them into going to Dry Falls, and they went and checked it out themselves, and then they wrote him the following letter. "Okay, Harlan, we are all now catastrophists. We believe you." Catastrophists, opposite of uniformitarianists, okay? In other words, the catastrophes have shaped the Earth's crust in the past. They weren't ready to go there until then. So, now, that's pretty cool. Fortunately, he was still alive. He was an old man, but he was still alive. But then he said something interesting. He said, "Now, we need to look at the Grand Canyon." The Grand Canyon. Because there's several features about the Grand Canyon that are hard to explain over long periods of time. And we'll take a look at that. Okay, so now where were you? That's a before picture. Where were you when we lost 1,300 feet in a matter of a few seconds, which is taller than Empire State Building? Castle Rock, Washington. Okay, was anyone in Yakima? Yakima was the worst place to be. Yakima got pounded. Ritzville, okay. Ritzville's close. Okay, to Yakima. Okay, May 18th, Sunday morning. And just like any other morning. And then suddenly we had this eruption that blew the side of the mountain off, and the top fell down as well. Let me describe a little to you what's going on there. Think of volcanoes as two basic types in terms of eruptions. There's the kind of, remember, magma is pushing up, lava is pushing up, there's pressure underneath, lava is trying to get out. Okay, it's pushing out this molten rock. There are two kinds of volcanoes. One has lots of cracks in it. Okay, vents. That's like Hawaii. Kilauea on the Big Island. No problem, the lava's got plenty of room to just come on out and make more Hawaii. That's a good thing. So it's just flowing constantly for like the last 50 or 60 years, uninterrupted, a lava flow. Okay, then there are other volcanoes that are like corks. There's no cracks whatsoever. And so the magma is pushing up and there's pressure building. Pressure. Now think of Mount St. Helens this way. Mount St. Helens was like this, pushing up, and there was one side that started to bulge out like this. It was bulging out like 5 feet a day or something. It was really bulging out toward the end there. And finally, it bulged out so far that it fell down. This side fell right down like that. It was like releasing a cork from a bottle, and then out it came. And all that stuff did a lot. Let's talk about what it did. It blew, I'm trying to think of something like 25 square miles of trees were knocked down. And the heat and the blast from it was like a 300 mile an hour heat wave that just vaporized the bark, vaporized the branches, the needles, and the force of it knocked these trees down off of their base, just knocked them over like so many toothpicks. Okay, you can't outrun what this was, 300 miles an hour. So anyway, washed a whole lot of these things down into Spirit Lake. Now, Spirit Lake was down here. Now it's up here with all the more water and material. It's now much taller than it used to be. And there's these logs floating in it. Now, you see these two guys here in the scuba gear are creation-oriented scientists. And they asked the Park Service after the eruption, after these logs were in the water, can we study the logs that are floating in Spirit Lake? They got permission, put on their gear. They took pictures. This is what they saw. When they looked up at some of the logs, they found out that some of the logs were floating like this. Now what happens is, The logs come in like this, but the base, or toward the bottom part, it's a little wider, a little heavier, a little denser. It waterlogs a little quicker than the rest of it. And so what happens is they come in like this, and eventually they go boop, like that for a little while, and then they sink completely down to the base and stick in the mud, like dropping a knife in sand. Shoot. Okay, so they notice there's a picture of one taken from beneath that's still floating, and here's the top of one that's stuck in the bottom of Spirit Lake. So then they went and asked the people at Yellowstone National Park, can we study the petrified forest at Specimen Creek? Now, I don't know if you've heard of Specimen Creek, but it's been portrayed for years as millions of years in a single snapshot. Because you've got these beautiful petrified trees, they're huge. Some you can't put your arms around, they're like this, and they're solid rock. Rock. Gorgeous things. But they're standing up out of the ground, straight up. And if you look up the sides of the hills, you can see there's dirt, and then, there's some trees. Oh, then there's some more dirt, and then there's more trees, and then there's more dirt and more trees. So it looks like they grew over millions of years and got covered up, preserved. Does that make sense? That's the way it's been presented. Now, these scientists from Mount St. Helens asked the park, can we dig around the base of some of these trees? What were they looking for? They were looking for roots. If they could find roots, then those trees were petrified in place where they grew. If there's no roots, then they got there in some different way. And guess what? No roots. And so what happened here, and then they conjectured, they wrote papers, that what happened here was similar to what's happening at Mount St. Helens. In other words, it's all part of a single great volcanic event, and many, many more times larger than Mount St. Helens. Now, if you know what Yellowstone is, Yellowstone National Park is basically the top of a volcano. Just think of it that way and you got it. And incidentally, you enjoy yourself next time you go, but it is ready to blow. Just thought I'd, but encourage you with that thought next time you're going through. That's why all those geysers are up close. All this heat is up close to the top, and yeah. So anyway, so their past also had volcanoes. So I was in Yellowstone's bookstore, one of their touristy bookstores, and I'm looking through things, and I hear a DVD on the player, and it's talking about sites in the park, what to see in Yellowstone. Okay, so I'm listening. Oh, petrified forest. What do they have to say about that? Now, thanks to studies done at Mount St. Helens, we now know that these trees floated into place, and we went on about it, and I thought, cool. Do they give, credit to creation scientists? No, but that's okay. You don't have to. But anyway, it's kind of cool. Creation scientists will ask questions nobody else does about some of this. So anyway, kind of interesting. Another thing that happened at Toutle River, part of the Mount St. Helens eruption, was they found out you can make Grand Canyons pretty easily. Well, I say easily, quickly. You can make them quickly. Because they have a little Grand Canyon now below Mount St. Helens that didn't used to be there. Now, for instance, here's some of the layering that took place. All this layering took place from what we would consider to be a single event or over several days. And this material came down and laid one on top of the other, and this has actually become rock now. This is no longer dirt, it's rock. And these rock layers are flat, one on top of the other like pancakes. And then the water erosion has continued, obviously, as you can see this canyon, and it's been eroded away, not unlike the Grand Canyon. Now, and take a look at the Grand Canyon, and what has always been pointed out as a problem for long age is the flat layers on top of each other. These are flat as pancake layers on top of each other. And they'll go for miles and miles and miles. Flat, flat, flat. If this was the top of the surface of the Earth, let's say, for a million years, let's say, for round number, why aren't there erosional features? Why aren't there canyons and valleys and so forth in there? Instead, they're one on top of the other. If that was the top of the ground for a while, you'd think erosion would shape some of it. But instead, there's one right on top of the other. Are you with me on this? You're following what I'm saying?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you say that the layers in the Toutle River were now rock?
Yes, that section you saw in the canyon has become.
How did you figure that when that was the material from the eruption?
It's already hardened into rock. It's already congealed and become very hard.
In this short time?
Yes.
No heat and pressure.
No heat and pressure. Well, pressure from rock on top, the weight of it. But yeah, interesting, huh? It's easier to make rock than you think. Sedimentary rock. We'll talk about sedimentary rock in just a minute. Okay, take a look at this. Where's this?
Monument Valley.
And you know what somebody said at the last church I did this at? Isn't that where Forrest Gump was running? And you know, and I look at this picture and said, yeah, I think so. Okay, I'm sorry. I had to throw that in there. Anyway, okay, take a look at this. Now, what is this really, though? Where is this? Monument Valley, okay, which is like around the Arizona-Utah border area. And take a look at this, and look at this. Now, when you see these monuments, they're called monuments, you can see that the level of ground is the same across here. It's up here. It's the same to top over here. All of these levels consist, you can tell at one time or another, the top of the ground was up here. You know, it was up here. Where did everything go? Where did all this go? It's not down below. It had to be moved out of there. Do you see this? Okay, so you got cubic miles of material, I mean many cubic miles of material, gone. Yes?
Right south of here, the John Day fossil monument, you see this kind of stuff, and they have a Hancock petrified tree.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, this area's been active. That's interesting. Okay. Now, there's things to see in the fossil area, no doubt about it, John Day area. So the point is, what happened to the dirt? What happened to all the ground that was here? And there is only one scientific explanation for moving this amount of dirt this far.
Water. Flood.
That thing. So, in other words, there has to be a whole lot of water moving, and preferably, it's easier if the stuff is still soft, the material is still soft and easy to carve. So, incidentally, evolutionists and creationists more or less agree with the idea that the continents have risen over time. They've risen. Now, if they've risen quickly, post-flood or part of the flood, then we can imagine that water was trying to drain off of the continents. If the water is trying to drain off the continents, it is conceivable, and here's some evidence, that at certain times some of the water might be gathered in pools and then broke free as they were emptying out. We would say that this looks like a drainage event took place here, a drainage event. Now, this is all upstream from the Grand Canyon, frankly. So it's conceivable that maybe a series of events were involved with the Grand Canyon. Incidentally, they've looked for the material that was in the Grand Canyon. And think of how much there must be somewhere. So they follow the Colorado River into the Gulf of California, which is between Baja and the body of Mexico. Gone down there and searched the waters and the area around there to see if they could find enough. And they could find some, but not enough. And so they've actually done studies. I remember reading one study where some people thought that the material was in the Mojave Desert in eastern California. So it's unclear where all the stuff went, but it doesn't seem to be going, it didn't seem to have gone where it's going now. That part is pretty clear. Okay, let's share a few other things from science. This is a Tapete sandstone, and the Tapete sandstone is this area in yellow. It's down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and it is considered to be the beginning of the fossil record. In other words, no fossils below, but here's a fossil record, beginning of life, Cambrian, Precambrian contact. Now, this is Dr. Art Chadwick of Southwestern Adventist University, and he asked permission of the park, can I study the Tapete sandstone? He got permission, and he went down there and he studied it. Now, it had been up to this time thought to have been a desert, dry formation. In other words, it happened not with water, but dry, the sandstone being made or formed. Well, Dr. Chadwick actually found out that the only way to repeat some of it and understand that they have ways of figuring out what a turbidite is. A turbidite is stuff that is laid down not with just water present, but it was laid out with water above. In other words, stuff comes from distance and settles in the bottom of a water tank kind of thing, and settles out. The way it settles, the pattern it settles in, scientists can determine. So if it comes a certain way, that was because there was a lot of water above it. Excuse me. Anyway, that's what they found out here. It was a turbidite, so that changed everything. And that kind of makes sense if that's the beginning of the fossil record. The beginning of the flood would be with lots of water present. Okay, anyway, let's just keep going. So the question has always been, you always really do good science when you start with a question you're trying to seek the answer to. And good questions will usually drive you into good science. So here's a pretty good question. When you look at the crust of the earth, and you know water's been involved, what would better explain what you see? Much water over little time, or little water over much time? And really, that's a great question. Okay, so, because water's been involved. Now, let's see, class, if you remember the 3 basic types of rocks. Okay, I heard one. I'm waiting for the first one to use. There it is. Okay, sedimentary. Let's start with sedimentary. Sedimentary rock is limestone sediments, made up of sediments. Limestone, sandstone, shale, coal, salt is a sedimentary rock. Okay, then we got igneous rock. And think of something that was ignited. It was hot and cooled. It became a rock. And that's like granite and quartz. Basalt is lava. It becomes basalt. Okay, and finally metamorphic, which is basically type 1 and 2 cooked into something else. So, changed, like marble or gneiss. Now, sedimentary rock is 75% of the rock in this world. And usually, sedimentary rock is formed with the presence of water. So, that's already telling you something. Think of concrete or cement. Think of cement. Just add water, rock. Okay, sedimentary rock. So most rock is made that way. And think of the Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon is all sedimentary rock practically. It's really a lot there. Okay, now what is the evolutionist Bible? The evolutionist Bible is, and it's not Origin of Species, it is the geologic column itself. In other words, because the rocks themselves will give an inerrant record of what's taken place, which I agree on. Although there are lots of interpretations. You heard me this morning say Grand Canyon to one person would be millions of years, look at it. Another person would say flood, look at it. So you have to read it properly, but there it is. And the standard view is these views. These are the standard years dating the geologic column. Paleozoic, based on eras are based on life, so early life, middle life, recent life. Periods are times within that, and this is the typical area of dinosaurs and so forth found up here. We'll talk about that. So anyway, right down to here in the Cambrian, Precambrian age, 570 million years ago, they say, give or take, is where life appears. And what's interesting is you get 32 out of 35 of the phyla, or types of critters, basic types and forms of critters, are already there within that layer. Now that's kind of tough to explain if your basic view is that you start off with one and you go branching on up the tree. You pretty much are starting with most types at the beginning, including trilobites. Trilobites, trust me, there are nerds out there that are trilobite people. They are, there is 1,000 species of trilobites. And there are some people that are so into it, they really can tell you all the details of a trilobite if you wanted to know. And there is for instance, there's every kind of eye known practically on a trilobite, the varieties of trilobites. They've got mammal type eyes, they've got insect type eyes, they've got fish type eyes, you name it. Some are on stems. It's just incredible the diversity there is just in trilobites, which happen to be extinct, incidentally. I always think of them as sort of like water cockroaches. But anyway, it's probably a mean thing to say. They might have been nicer than that. But anyway, from little tiny dinky little things all the way up to like this, trilobites existed. But again, difficult to explain with the idea of simple going to complex, when at the very bottom of the fossil record, animals are as complex as they are today, with systems every bit as developed. So, kind of interesting. Dr. Roth, who I take to be the dean of Adventist scientists, says scientists commonly refer to this abrupt transition as a Cambrian explosion. Few or no new basic types show up above this level. Okay, now let's keep going. Now, Darwin talked about little changes over a lot of time. Little changes, slight modifications. If you couldn't prove that something happened with little changes, his theory would break down. So, remember, supposedly little changes over long periods of time. Evolution's tree of life. Well, let's go. Now, this is worth making note of. Here it is. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret of paleontology. What's a trade secret?
Something they don't talk about.
Well, they talk about it, but where do they talk about it only? With their colleagues, right? It's in the trade. But a trade secret is not something they go public with and give quotes to the press. So the paleontologists have a trade secret. What is it? The rarity of transitional fossil forms. Okay, the evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. Okay, now who would say something like that? Nobody less than Stephen Jay Gould, who at the Harvard evolutionist, who more or less I consider to be virtually the Pope of evolution for years and years. He was in every single PBS Nova thing because he was articulate, he was funny, he gave great quotes. So, but here he is admitting to a trade secret. Now, what is he saying? He is saying, I'm going to go back to this tree then for a minute. He's saying that we got fossils here and here and here and here and here. We just don't have fossils here. We don't have the connecting fossils between animals and their ancestors. We just have frog fossils. We just have bird fossils. We just have... And now Darwin knew about this in his day. He knew that the fossils weren't helpful for his theory. And so he predicted that they would find them. Give it enough time, they'll find all the missing links. This is a missing links issue. Missing links. And the trade secret by Stephen Jay Gould is we still got them. Now, just in case you think this is a reasonable, well, take a look. Take a look. This is, for instance, one. I don't know if you've seen this in your textbooks. Have you seen this? This one's been used forever. This was in my geology books. And the evolution of the horse. And this was early on. I mean, during Darwin's days, they thought they had this established. In other words, a horse is going from a 3 or 4 toe all the way up to a 1 toe, which is a hoof, and so forth. And they thought they had these. The problem is that they've been finding horse fossils in wrong places, wrong layers. And this guy right here might even have been a rabbit. They're not sure. And so the point is, this is not as established as those wonderful pictures show. I'm going to show you that they even admit that. So understand what Darwin said. Darwin was saying, and every evolutionist believes that a mouse became a bat, or a bat was once a mouse. So it's a bat is a mouse with wings. So somehow it developed wings. Darwin's view, and Darwin is not cutting edge as much as people think, but Darwin's view would be that if you go down below a bat, you should find a 50-50 somewhere, or a 70-30 or a 30-70. Are you with me on this? In other words, on the way to becoming a bat. And yet all we have are bat fossils and mice fossils. That's all we got. And there's lots of them. We just don't find the right ones in between. So take a look at these critters. These critters have very distinct and very unique body shapes. When you see them, you know what you're looking at, right? So whenever you see these guys, they appear in the fossil record immediately without anything underneath it, although there's plenty of fossils underneath them. Nothing that is looking like an ancestor on the way to becoming something like these forms. Now, here, this is an evolutionist talking about this problem, besides Stephen Jay Gould. We're now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. Okay, we have found fossils. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but the situation hasn't changed much. We have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. In other words, the horse is getting weaker. The one that you may have heard about is whale evolution. Have you ever heard of whale evolution? And the idea of whale evolution is that there was a wolf-like critter. Well, originally we all started in the water, evolved out of the water, and then something became sort of like a wolf, and then a wolf's like to eat fish, and found, I got to be careful the way I say this, I don't want to sound cynical, but this is basically it. We became more proficient at getting fish by evolving back into the water. And so evolved back into the water, moved its nostril from here up to here because that would help swimming, and that's what a whale was at one time, because it's a mammal, and it evolved to the ground and then moved out of the ground back into the water. And they thought they had a couple of fossils that looked sort of like that, but the facts are those fossils are challenged even by evolutionists as being a little bit dreamy. In other words, they're dreaming when they have just this much and that much, a couple of pieces, and imagining the whole animal look like this. Or, you know what I mean? And often they find just a few pieces of a fossil animal. Incidentally, how much do you need to find of an animal for it technically becomes a skeleton over against some remains? Only 10%. 10% qualifies as a skeleton. So you'll often see a newspaper article saying they found a skeleton of a something or other, and it's changed everything, but it often can be just like a leg bone and a hip and anyway, just so. Okay, so we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. This is at the Field Museum in Chicago. Okay, here's a creative solution, and you got to give points for creativity. This is Richard Goldschmidt, and he was a Jewish scientist who got out of Germany at the right time, came to the West, and he says evolution is not a little atomistic, a little tiny change, but a real different, complete change. In other words, he called them hopeful monsters. In other words, a mouse had a bat for a baby. And then the bat somehow was able to find another bat or something that can make more bats. And that's how that happened. Now, give them points for creativity. That does fit the fossil record better, because we don't find these Darwinian little changes. And now, Stephen Jay Gould even liked it, and he said he got the term punctuated equilibrium, or punk-ec. So the punk-ec view is mouse, 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 mouse. That's equilibrium, mouse, 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 punctuated by bat. Bat, 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 bat. So, okay, creativity. Now, evolutionists have not jumped on this bandwagon. This has been rejected because the biological issues for this, times a million species, times several times in those million species, gets to be a little challenging. But nevertheless, you've got to admit it's a clever thing to think. Now, what makes a fossil? How do you get a fossil? And like a plate like this with trilobites and so forth. Take a look at some of the fish that we found, and look at this guy right here. This is wonderfully preserved, beautiful specimen. And you look at the detail, the fine detail of the scales and everything, and you think, wow. And then you ask a good question, how do you make something like that? How do you get that? And it takes several things to work in your favor to get a beautifully preserved thing like this. Real fine sediment. But certain things that happen that will kill bacteria that would normally chew the animal up before it's preserved. And there's several things going on. But please notice this by an evolutionist, talking about fish fossils in particular. When a fish dies, its body bloats on the surface or sinks. The explanation of the origin of fossils by the theory of uniformity in evolution contradicts that nothing took place in the past, does not take place in the present. Today, no fossils are formed. Okay? He's an evolutionist too, and he saw the problem. He said, we've always said that nothing happens today that hasn't always been going on, and yet that can't be because we don't have fossils being made today. So something happened in the past. He went on, he has quite a long description of what happens This is talking about the Green River, Wyoming formation of fossils that some of you are familiar with, and it's just billions of fish. And so he talked about this. How do we have billions of fish perfectly preserved? In fact, he said even in a state of agony when they were preserved, when that's not the way fish die today. So anyway, yeah. Now, guess what? We got a problem too. And if I don't say in a mixed group that we've got problems or unanswered questions as well, I lose credibility. So you got to admit where we have still answers to look for. And that is fossil order. Why are certain animals always in certain places in the fossil record? And there is a consistency here. Now, as a kid, when I heard about the flood, I imagined it was like a great big washing machine that just simply threw everything together and churned it all up, and then water went down and everything sort of settled out, all put together, mixed together. That is not the way the fossil order is. It's fairly set in some order. Now, how can we explain this? There is some explanation, some of it, partial answers anyway. And this is Dr. Leonard Brand from Loma Linda, a scientist, and he saw the Coconino sandstone. This piece of rock I have in my collection. Coconino sandstone comes from the Grand Canyon area, and it's a layer that they call the Permian layer. And Permian layer is the standard view is 250 million years, okay? Pretty old. And that's a standard view. Now, this particular rock has a track of at least 3 or more lizards walking in the same direction. And behind each footprint is some sand mounded up. Now, the standard view has been this is a desert situation, a dry formation, again, not with water, and partly because it's a lizard. It's not a salamander, it doesn't have webbing between the toes, so it looks like a lizard. It's about an inch wide footprint. Incidentally, they'd never found any bones of this, but anyway, that's what they're imagining. So, Dr. Brand wanted to find out, can I exactly duplicate these footprints? What would it take to exactly duplicate the footprints? So he got himself a tank of sand. He got himself a salamander. You are my volunteer. Walk. So put it in the dry sand. First of all, dry sand could not make these footprints. Made it a little damper, a little bit of water, just slightly damp. Couldn't make the footprints. Really soaked the sand. Couldn't make the footprints. Then he put water above the sand, and the salamander literally was splashing, walking along, and that did it. That did it. Now, when you see footprints like this, with the salamander splashing through water, and they're all going the same direction, what does that tell you? They were trying to escape rising water. Does that make sense? They're going the same direction. They're trying to get away from rising water. I remember reading not too long ago, a couple months ago, an article about dinosaur footprints. I'll talk about dinosaur footprints when I do dinosaurs in a bit. But this particular article was related to this because they found a set of large footprints, big footprints, but the shape was weird. They couldn't make out why the shape was the way it was. Finally, they determined the following. This is what they suggested. These dinosaurs were swimming, and they were pushing off of the ground, trying to stay afloat. Now, these dinosaurs were not Cretaceous. They were Jurassic, which is interesting to me. This wouldn't have been at the end of their supposed life when dinosaurs became extinct. This was earlier. Lower, anyway, they would say. So, kind of interesting, and again, I just wanted to be the kid in the room that say, oh, teacher, I think I know what happened. But anyway, trying to get away from rising water. So we often find footprints not on the same level as the bones are found. Almost never find the bones on the same level the footprints are. In fact, one of the most famous dinosaur footprint displays is in Massachusetts, and they've got a park there and everything, and a lot of them under it. Thousands have been found, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the point is, they've never found a single bone of that dinosaur that made that. In fact, there's 2 different footprints, 2 dinosaurs. They've never found a bone of either one of them. And again, I'd suggest to you it may be because they got to higher levels. Well, keep that thought because we'll get to it. Incidentally, other possibilities of so the point is these animals were able to get away and perhaps get to top of hills and so forth where communities would be caught and put together, covered together. That's a possible partial solution. Another possible, that would be ecological zonation. Motility factors, how fast animals could move. There is interesting buoyancy studies, bloat and float studies, on how long things were floating. Birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, those were how many days the bodies would stay up, and that's actually reasonably close to the record, fossil record. Okay, let's do a couple of real quick facts on the Bible story itself. How big was the ark? Okay, not the one in Kentucky. How big was the ark? 450 feet or 300 cubits. What's a cubit? This, right? So 300 of these. If it's Egyptian, it's a couple of 3 inches bigger. But anyway, I'm not sure why. Width, 75 feet. Height, 45 feet. 3 decks, 1.5 million cubic feet capacity. If you were using modern-day train cars, how many train cars could fill that ark? You ready? 522. So the ark was pretty good in terms of capacity. Incidentally, here's a good question, trivia question. Why did God say to Noah, build me an ark, instead of using the Hebrew word, build me a boat? What's an ark? And to help you along with that question, what's the Ark of the Covenant? So what does the word ark mean? Moses had an ark, and Noah had an ark. What's the consistency? What? It's a container. It's a box. Now, literally, it's, and we got a pretty much King James. It's box. Build me a box. A treasure box where I can put my treasures in, my special things in. He doesn't say build a boat, which is interesting because the Hebrew word exists. They could have said build a ship. But, okay, so Ark of the Covenant, sounds much more poetic, much better than Ten Commandment box. Okay, now this is an Adventist group here. You should have laughed at that one. Ark of the Covenant, that's what we always call it. It's the exact same Hebrew translation of Ten Commandment box. Aren't you glad it's Ark of the Covenant instead of Ten Commandment? See, if I have to repeat a joke, it's not any good. Either that or that, what was that, blueberry? Man, that's settling in now, isn't it? Okay, it's kind of glazing over. That was good stuff. Okay, now what has regularly been raised as a problem with the ark story is the number of animals that would have to be on there. And again, it depends upon species and what are we talking about, because the Hebrew word says kinds. That's not helpful scientifically. What's a kind? Is it a species? Is it genera? Is it an order or family? Or what is it exactly? So, let's just, for the fun of it, say 8,000 animal pairs, 16,000 animals, plus provisions for a year, and over half of the ark would be available. And let's see if you get what kids correctly answer on this when I say, why was the ark that big? See if you get what the kids notice. Why was the ark that big?
People would believe that they could get on the ark.
She said so there was room for more people.
Amen.
There was room for more people. Why did kids get that so quickly? That's pretty good. Sharp. Thank you. So there was room for more people. Okay, now wait a minute. 8,000 genera, that can't make all the animals. Let's face it. Look at all the different kinds of animals. Okay, I've got a theory. I don't want you to quote me. Oh, this is being recorded, isn't it? Oh, man. I'm in trouble. Here's a possibility, and this is just my view, okay? Nothing official and nothing in stone. Notice the human population coming off of the ark. Within 2 generations already, we have, in one of Noah's grandsons is called Cush. Cush in Hebrew means black. He is the beginning of the African American race. Within 2 generations of Noah. Within 2 generations of Noah, it's pretty clear if you do a study of the different family groups, we're already talking about most of the races of the earth within just a couple of generations. Now, that tells me something. Number one, that tells me that the DNA, the health, the vitality, the strength of those people who lived to be 900 years old, coming off of the flood was incredible. The variety, possibilities of children and grandchildren was immense. They were able to have all kinds of the spectrum for kids was just huge. Now, if that's the case, and it seems to be, if you read the different races coming off with just a couple of generations, what about the animals? Could the animals possibly have been similarly that healthy, that strong, that able to produce varieties? Now, here's the thought. I'm a birder, and I'm coming out of the closet, admitting it before everyone, and it's on tape now. I'm a birder. I'm sorry. I like birds. I go out with binoculars, and I look at birds. So, if you know anything about a hairy woodpecker and a downy woodpecker, a hairy woodpecker is a downy woodpecker that somebody did this to, stretched it. That's it. It's the same bird otherwise, or took a hairy and went. The markings are the same. Everything is the same. And the point is this, and there you could almost get all of the at least I'm familiar with North American birds, almost all of the kinds of woodpeckers from 3 or 4 basic types of woodpeckers. You could get the hummingbirds from, I don't know, very few, warblers, vireos, raptors from 3 or 4 kinds of raptors, and things like that. It's just different colors of feathers and stuff. You know, it's not that hard to imagine starting off with a few basic types. So you all know what a wolf can produce, right, in terms of dog varieties. All our dogs come from a wolf. And look at all the different kinds. Even poodles come from... I read this hilarious article written by a creation scientist about his wife's poodle, and talked about how it was the end of the line, evolutionarily wise. All the different things that were inferior in it. And he said, my wife is going to kill me about the can't do this, can't do... Anyway, you're not doing... Now, and interestingly, almost all animals have boundaries in terms of their DNA as to how far you can develop them. There are dead ends. You'll never be able to have a 50-foot Airedale or something like that. They just won't get that big, animals. There's limitations, but within those limitations, there's quite a lot of variety that can be found. And so I'm thinking maybe like the human species coming off of the ark, maybe the animals were likewise able to do a lot with just a few because of the strength of those ancestors. Okay, I don't know how else to put it besides the word strength, but just the health of them. That's a possibility. Okay. And guess what? I can't prove it, but you can't disprove it. So there I am. Now, what happened to the evidence of pre-flood man? And let's face it, there's precious little. Precious little that anybody would agree on. So what happened to it? I want you to first of all see the Hebrew word that God uses for man, what he was going to do with man. It says, and to me this is a sad verse. I'm not sure of a sadder verse in the Bible where it said God was sorry he made man. Didn't that hit you? And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart to see what man had become. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth. The word destroy there in Hebrew is a very strong word, and it's like the Hebrew housewife with her plate, and cleaning her plate afterwards, washing it or whatever. It's like, I will do this to man. Wipe him off the face of the earth as it, and remove him. Gone. Okay. That's kind of interesting. I just find that interesting to start off with, the description of what he was going to do with man. But let's think for a moment. Let's say that the floodwaters did come slowly up the sides of hills, catch animals, keep going up higher mountains, catch other groups, finally to the top of... Where are people going to be? They're going to be at the top of the highest mountains. If people had the opportunity to go, I would think, again, the description with the footprints is that the waters rose at a pace that animals could move. And if animals can move, people can move, certainly. So, well, I'm not sure. Probably faster than that lizard. And could see it coming from further off and figure out this is something. Remember, they probably, if the Bible's right in saying they'd never seen rain before, I think that the terror of people, wasn't like waking up and, oh, it's rainy this morning. It's like, my goodness, what have we got going here? It's like, this is it. So anyway, scary. So what would happen to people who are caught at the tops of mountains? What would happen to them? When the water settled, okay, first of all, what's going to happen to them physically first? They're going to drown. Okay, secondly, what's going to happen to them as the waters subside? They're going to be on the surface of the ground, aren't they, their bodies? Okay, they are not preserved because they were not caught lower down like all the other things were. This is a partial answer. But to me, that makes some sense. It's the Hebrew, the Genesis description says God sent a great wind. Now, wind, think of what wind is. Wind is basically this atmosphere trying to stabilize. It's trying to get the same temperature everywhere and the same pressure, and they're just trying to fill and move around and get all that done. And so, after the flood, the atmosphere was crazy for a while. And we think this is part of what caused the Ice Age. But anyway, the atmosphere is now blowing wind, tremendous wind. And if you read Patriarchs and Prophets on this, it says God used that wind to bury the human bodies. Now, not bury them in the sense of fossilizing them, but burying them as we would bury them today. It's a few feet of dirt. And therefore not made into fossils. That's a possibility. If you're not completely happy with that, I have questions too. But that goes some distance, I think. Again, remember, the evidence of the fossil evidence is not that everything was thrown together, but rather slowly got covered up over a process of some. Now, guess what? Evolutionists, now this is an evolution-oriented and population expert writing about this. Population. If we came out of Africa 1 to 2 million years ago, the popular view, right now you and I should be walking down the street like this. Pardon me? Excuse me? Pardon me? Because there should be many times the number of people that we have here. Notice this. They notice a problem. That means you've got to come up with a hypothesis for the event that wiped out the vast majority of that population variation. Something caused the human population to drop drastically. When or how often that may have happened is anybody's guess. Possible culprits include environmental disaster. The name of the title of the article is We Dodged Extinction. So somewhere back in the history, the human population went way down to just practically, 8 or so. And then kind of went back up again. Okay, all right. Don't you again want to be, I think I know the answer there. Okay, so again, maybe it was that. Yeah. Yeah. What was the population? What do you mean? Oh, in other words, he's saying it's. Oh, what was it before the flood? There's been estimates all over the place, but that in 1600 years there could be millions of people living. There could have been millions.
Because they didn't die very young.
They didn't die very young. They had kids for a while. Lots of kids. Lots of kids. It's possible. I would say more than 7 figures anyway. Multiple millions. Okay, so yes, what caused the chain of events that caused the flood? Started it. And there's all kinds of things here, but I'll just leave you with the one I think makes the most sense. And that is some sort of asteroid strike of some kind. And there's lots of evidence for meteor strikes, asteroid strikes. And here's a possibility. Most evolutionists, most creationists will agree that at one point the Earth's axis probably was straight up and down with the sun. Somehow or other it's like this now. It's tilted. What caused that? And a possibility is an asteroid strike or a meteor strike of some kind. Could have been multiple meteors. Could have knocked it over like this. If that happened, and if the impact of the asteroids were sufficient to have broken the crust of the Earth, change the pressure of the water underground, and all this kind of stuff, it could have started a chain reaction that could explain it. You know what? It works into my theology, real briefly. Theology of God throwing rocks as God's execution style or judgment style, Sodom and Gomorrah and so forth. It's not unusual for God to do that, and he even told his people, I want you to execute people by throwing rocks. Now, why would he do that? Because it is the most miserable form of execution possible, and he wanted it to be miserable, so they would do everything in their power to avoid having to ever do it again. And so he was sharing with them his own pain, like Abraham offering his son and learning what God would go through. So I'm thinking that makes sense to me theologically. That just relates to me. Okay, we're done. And we're done with the fossil, with the flood. I'm going to give you a break right now if you want to get up, stretch, get the blood going again from that great food. And then we are going to come back for the dinosaurs. Yes. Okay, so is that good, Calvin? Did that work? Okay. Calvin says it works. It works. Pastor Tim, we're good? Take 10 minutes.
So are you going to talk about dating?
Dating, well,
Because